Picture this: a sea of golden sand stretching as far as your eyes can possibly see. No trees, no water, no life. Scientists said nothing could grow here, but then China did something nobody expected. They released over 1 million rabbits into the desert. And what happened next completely rewrote the rules of nature. Most of us carry a fixed image in our heads when we hear the word desert. Scorching heat, cracked, lifeless earth, rolling dunes that swallow everything in their path. A place where survival feels impossible and where nature itself seems to have surrendered. And for good reason. Deserts are brutal, unforgiving, relentless. But here's what nobody tells you. Deserts aren't always permanent. They're not always final. Sometimes, with the right idea, the right creature, and the right amount of human determination, even the most barren landscape on Earth can be brought back to life. That's exactly what happened in the Dalat Banner region of Inner Mongolia, in northern China. A place that was once little more than an ocean of shifting, suffocating sand has been completely transformed. And the unlikely hero of this story isn't a tree, isn't a billion-dollar government megaproject, and isn't some cutting-edge piece of technology. It's a rabbit. Specifically, 1.2 million rabbits. Now before you click away, stay with me, because this story is far more complex, far more fascinating, and far more consequential than it sounds. This is a story about ecological collapse, human ingenuity, economic desperation, and one of the most audacious environmental experiments ever attempted anywhere on this planet. And it worked. So today, we're going to unpack every layer of it. We'll travel back to when China's deserts were spiraling dangerously out of control. We'll look at the science that made this rabbit experiment possible. We'll examine the economics that lifted farmers from poverty to prosperity. And we'll ask the big question, what does China's desert rabbit revolution mean for the rest of the world? Let's start at the beginning. To understand why China's rabbit experiment is so remarkable, you first have to understand just how desperate the situation had become. China, the world's third largest country by total land area, had always battled the encroachment of its deserts. But by the late 20th century, that battle was being lost. Badly. In the 1990s, global desertification data painted a frightening picture. China's desertified land had ballooned to an estimated 1.714 million square kilometers. Let that number sink in. That's roughly the size of Iran, an entire nation-sized swath of land that had essentially become unusable, unlivable, and ecologically dead. And that represented nearly 1/5 of China's total land area. But the story didn't stop there. It got worse. As China entered the 21st century on a wave of rapid industrial expansion, the deserts weren't retreating, they were advancing. According to environmental monitoring data from that period, China's desertified areas were expanding at a rate of approximately 10,400 square kilometers every single year. That's roughly 10 times the size of Manhattan disappearing into sand annually. By 2015, the total desertified land area had grown to a staggering 2.62 million square kilometers, a full third of the country's entire landmass. A third. And this wasn't just a numbers problem on a government report, it was a survival problem. Desertification was devouring farmland, destroying water sources, and suffocating communities. In China's northern regions, entire villages were being literally buried under drifting sand dunes. Families who had farmed the same land for generations were forced to abandon everything and migrate to already overcrowded cities. And then there were the sandstorms. Massive walls of dust, generated by these expanding deserts, swept eastward across China and even reached South Korea and Japan. A regional environmental crisis that choked cities, grounded flights, and sent air quality into dangerous territory. Beijing itself was regularly blanketed in thick, suffocating dust that turned the sky a sickly yellow-brown. The sand was winning, and everyone knew it. Faced with this scale of crisis, China made a decision that would define its environmental policy for decades. It mobilized, aggressively, systematically, at a scale no country had ever attempted before. China launched the famous Three Norths Shelter Belt program, a decades-long mission to plant a massive belt of trees across northern China as a windbreak against the advancing deserts. Often called the Green Great Wall, it became the largest afforestation project in recorded human history, with a planned span of nearly 4,500 kilometers. Other programs followed. Policies restricted overgrazing on fragile grasslands. Farmers were financially incentivized to plant trees and grasses. New legislation placed entire desert regions under environmental protection. These efforts were massive, and in many ways admirable. But there was a fundamental problem. Trees take time, decades, and in the meantime, the sand kept moving. The wind kept stripping away whatever thin layer of soil remained. The roots of newly planted saplings simply couldn't anchor the deep, loose desert sand fast enough to make a measurable difference in the worst affected regions. It was like trying to stop a flood with a garden hose. Something different was needed. Something faster. Something that could work with the desert rather than against it. And someone eventually had to ask a question that had never been seriously posed before. What if, instead of fighting the desert's nature, we used it? That question, and the answer it eventually produced, changed everything. Part 3. The Scientist Who Changed the Conversation. In 1988, one of China's most celebrated scientists stepped forward with a perspective that, honestly, challenged the entire framework of how the country was approaching desertification. His name was Qian Shuisun. If you're not familiar with him, Qian was one of the founding fathers of China's space and missile program. He was a physicist of extraordinary brilliance who had trained at MIT and Caltech before returning to China to help build its scientific infrastructure. By any honest measure, he was one of the most accomplished scientific minds of the 20th century. In his later years, Qian turned his intellectual firepower toward the desert. His argument was both simple and, really profound. China's approach to desertification was too narrow, too reactive, and fundamentally misguided. Yes, planting trees mattered. Yes, stabilizing dunes was important. But these were symptoms being treated, not the underlying disease being cured. Qian argued that the real solution lay in reimagining the desert, not as a problem to be eliminated, but as a resource to be developed. He proposed integrating grassland management, agriculture, and animal husbandry into one unified, self-sustaining system. Stop fighting the desert, he said. Start working with it. His ideas were visionary, but they were also, at the time, largely theoretical. Someone had to turn concept into reality. And, as often happens in human history, it was entrepreneurs, people driven by vision and profit in equal measure, who stepped forward to build the bridge. Part 4. The Entrepreneurs Who Bet on the Sand. Word of Qian's thinking spread through China's business community and landed in fertile ground. A growing number of entrepreneurs, frustrated with saturated coastal markets and hungry for untapped opportunity, began to see the desert differently. Not as a wasteland, as a blank canvas. A consortium of Chinese business leaders developed an ambitious plan. They would invest up to 750 million yuan, that's over 100 million US dollars, to establish a salix tree plantation spanning approximately 300,000 acres across the desert. The goal was to use those trees as an ecological foundation for a much larger transformation, eventually extending greening efforts to nearly 3 million acres of surrounding land. Salix, a genus of willow-like shrubs, is remarkable for its ability to thrive in arid, sandy conditions. Its deep root systems anchor loose soil. Its canopy reduces surface evaporation. And, critically, it turns out to be excellent fodder for a very specific animal. But to truly unlock the project's potential, the entrepreneurs needed a living engine. an animal that could simultaneously support the ecosystem, generate economic returns, and scale rapidly enough to make a measurable difference. The search began. Researchers studied dozens of species. The criteria were demanding: hardy enough for harsh desert conditions, ecologically beneficial rather than destructive, commercially valuable, and capable of rapid population growth. After extensive study and cross-referencing with international agricultural data, the team landed on a surprising candidate: a rabbit from France. Part 5. Enter the Rex hare. The animal at the center of this story is known as the Rex hare, a specially bred variant of the Rex rabbit, a large, short-haired breed that originated in France in the early 20th century. Now you might reasonably ask what a French rabbit has to do with an inner Mongolian desert. But once you understand this animal's natural characteristics, the connection becomes almost elegant in its logic. The Rex hare loves dry conditions. Unlike many rabbit breeds that require humid, temperate environments, this animal actively prefers arid, clean spaces. Damp conditions stress it. Open, dry land suits it perfectly. And then there's what it does to the ground beneath it. Rex hares are exceptional diggers. Given open desert sand, they burrow into it, scratching and tunneling in search of grass roots and dried plant matter beneath the surface. This instinctive digging behavior performs a critical ecological function. Every time a Rex hare digs into desert sand, it aerates the soil. It breaks up the compacted surface layer. It creates depressions and channels that allow rainwater to penetrate deeper rather than evaporating off bare, baked ground. It loosens the soil structure, making it far more hospitable for plant roots. And then there's what the rabbit leaves behind. Rex hare droppings are rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and organic matter, precisely the nutrients that desert soils most desperately lack. Every rabbit moving through the desert is essentially a mobile fertilizer unit, continuously enriching the ground as it travels. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Rex hares cannot efficiently digest hard-shelled seeds. Their digestive systems simply aren't built for it, so those seeds pass through the rabbit intact and are deposited across the desert floor in nutrient-rich droppings, transported to new locations, pre-softened by digestive juices, and dropped onto soil that has just been freshly aerated and fertilized by the very animal that carried them. The rabbit becomes a seed dispersal machine, a soil engineer, a fertilizer factory, all in one small, energetic, rapidly multiplying package. The results were staggering. In areas where Rex hares were introduced, plant survival rates climbed to 96% and above. Vegetation that would previously have withered and died in the unforgiving sand was taking root, spreading, and thriving. The desert was, slowly but unmistakably, beginning to green. Part 6. The numbers that tell the real story. Let's talk scale, because honestly, the numbers here are what truly illustrate the magnitude of what China achieved. Rex hares reproduce at a rate approximately 25 times higher than most conventional livestock. A single healthy female can produce around 40 offspring in a single year. In many ecological contexts, that reproductive rate would be, well, pretty alarming. But here, it became one of the program's greatest assets. As rabbit numbers grew, the ecological impact scaled proportionally. More rabbits meant more soil aeration. More droppings meant more nutrients. More seed dispersal meant faster vegetation expansion. By the time the program had matured, China had successfully raised over 1.2 million Rex hares in the desert. Each of those animals was constantly moving, constantly digging, constantly depositing waste, constantly spreading seeds. Day after day, month after month, year after year. The cumulative ecological work performed by that many animals is simply staggering. It would take thousands of human workers operating for decades to replicate it manually, and the data confirmed it. Across treated areas of Dalat Banner, vegetation coverage surged from less than 3% to an extraordinary 84.7%. That's not a gradual improvement. That's not a modest gain. A desert that was 97% bare sand became a landscape where more than 4/5 of the ground was covered in living, growing vegetation. The desert wasn't just being managed, it was being reversed. But here's something important to understand. This project was never purely an environmental exercise. For it to be truly sustainable, it had to generate real, lasting economic value for the people who actually lived there. And this is where the Rex hare reveals its second remarkable quality, commercial versatility. Rex hare meat is lean, low in fat, and high in protein, prized in Chinese culinary culture as a healthy, flavorful alternative to conventional meats. As the rabbit population expanded, so did the commercial supply chain. Restaurants, wholesalers, and food processing companies established relationships with the desert farms. A market grew from almost nothing. Then there's the fur. Rex rabbit fur is considered among the finest in the world, impossibly soft, dense, with a distinctive velvet-like quality that luxury fashion manufacturers actively seek. High-end fur coat producers pay significant premiums for well-maintained Rex fur in both domestic and international markets. This dual commercial value, meat and fur, gave the program an economic resilience that single-product ventures rarely achieve. If meat prices dipped, fur revenues compensated. If fur demand shifted, the food market provided a stable floor. And then there was the Salix itself. The vast plantations weren't just ecological infrastructure, they were an agricultural product. Salix wood has industrial applications in paper production and biofuel manufacturing. Salix leaves provide fodder for the rabbits. The trees and the animals reinforced each other commercially as much as ecologically. What agricultural economists call an integrated industrial chain had been created. Multiple components, each reinforcing the others, producing a whole far more resilient than the sum of its parts. The human impact? By the time the program had matured, average annual income for farming households in Dalat Banner had reached approximately $20,000. For a region previously defined by poverty, degradation, and outmigration, that figure represented a transformation not just of the landscape but of human lives. Families that had been preparing to leave were building new homes. Children who had grown up in dust and scarcity were attending better schools. Communities that had been hollowing out were beginning, for the first time in a generation, to grow again. The desert hadn't just been greened. It had been economically reborn. One of the most powerful aspects of the Dalat Banner story is what you might call the Oasis effect. The way ecological recovery and economic growth, once set in motion together, began feeding each other in an accelerating cycle. As vegetation coverage expanded, the landscape changed in ways that went far beyond the immediate farming areas. Grasses stabilized the surface and reduced sandstorm frequency. Shrubs and small trees created microclimates where temperature and humidity were more moderate, encouraging even more plant growth. Groundwater levels showed measurable improvement in some areas as vegetation held the soil and reduced evaporation. Small wetland areas, true oases, began forming in depressions where water now accumulated rather than vanishing instantly off baked sand. Wildlife returned. Birds absent from the region for years were observed nesting in the new vegetation. Small mammals reappeared. The food chain, once almost entirely broken in this desert, began to reassemble itself. And where wildlife appears and landscapes transform from barren to beautiful, tourism follows. The greened areas of Dalat Banner became an attraction, a living, breathing demonstration of environmental restoration that drew visitors from across China and beyond. Eco-tourism operations developed guided tours of the rabbit farms, the Salix forests, and the expanding oasis landscapes. Tourism revenue added another economic stream to a community that, just years earlier, had barely any at all. More rabbits meant more vegetation. More vegetation meant more wildlife and better scenery. Better scenery meant more tourists. Tourism revenue funded further investment in the rabbit program, which meant more rabbits, which meant more vegetation, an ecosystem, ecological and economic, had been born. As the program scaled, it became a testing ground for some of the most advanced agricultural and environmental monitoring technology in the world. Drones equipped with multispectral cameras flew regular survey missions over the desert, capturing detailed data on vegetation coverage, soil moisture, and rabbit population distribution. This data fed into analytical systems that tracked ecological progress in near real time and identified where targeted intervention was needed. Smart sensors embedded in the soil monitored nutrient levels, temperature, and moisture continuously. Rabbit health and population data were tracked digitally, enabling precise management of breeding cycles and preventing the kind of uncontrolled population explosion that could have tipped the program from ecological asset to ecological problem. Satellite imagery provided a bird's-eye record of the transformation as it unfolded over years, creating visual evidence of the desert's greening that was both scientifically invaluable and, when compiled into time-lapse form, publicly compelling. This technological layer made the program not just more efficient, but exportable. China also established the Belt and Road Desert Green Economic Innovation Center, an institution designed to package the lessons of Dalit Banner and share them internationally, training specialists from partner countries and facilitating knowledge transfer to desert-affected regions across Africa, Central Asia, and the Middle East. The desert experiment had become a model, and the world was paying attention. When the United Nations Environment Program surveys global environmental restoration projects, it looks for initiatives that are not just locally impactful but globally instructive. Projects that combine ecological effectiveness with economic sustainability in ways that can genuinely be replicated elsewhere. The Dalit Banner transformation checked every single one of those boxes. The UN Environment Program designated the region as a global desert ecological economic demonstration zone, placing China's rabbit-driven restoration project among a very small number of initiatives worldwide that had achieved genuine, measurable, scalable success in combating desertification. This designation opened doors to international collaboration, research partnerships, and knowledge sharing with countries across Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia that are facing their own escalating desert crises. Countries in the Sahel region of Africa, where desertification is displacing millions and destabilizing entire nations, are now studying China's model with serious interest. Can the Rex hare approach work there? Can a carefully designed integration of rabbit husbandry, native shrub planting, and smart agricultural technology help reverse degradation in Niger, Mali, or Burkina Faso, the way it reversed Dalit Banners? The answer isn't simple. Desert environments vary enormously in ecology, soil composition, climate, and community context. Adaptation will be required wherever this model is applied. But the principle has been proven. Deserts can be turned productive through a carefully designed integration of ecology and economy, using living animals as the engine of transformation. That's not a theory anymore. It's a documented, internationally recognized, scientifically verified fact. So let's bring it all home. In a region of China once defined by ecological collapse, where sand buried fields, swallowed villages, and pushed families to the edge, a transformation has taken place that challenges everything we thought we knew about deserts. It didn't happen through brute force. It didn't require technology that only wealthy nations could afford. It didn't emerge from a laboratory or a government mandate alone. It happened because a scientist dared to think differently about a problem everyone else was approaching from the same tired angle. It happened because entrepreneurs were willing to bet on an idea that sounded, on the surface, almost absurd. It happened because farmers in the desert learned new skills, trusted an unfamiliar system, and persevered through years of uncertainty. And it happened because of 1.2 million rabbits, small, furry, apparently unremarkable animals, that turned out to be extraordinary ecological engineers, quietly transforming the sand beneath them one burrow at a time. Today, where there was once nothing but dead sand, there are oases. There are trees and grasses and wildlife. There are thriving communities earning real incomes and building real futures. Vegetation coverage stands at 84.7% in a landscape that was once 97% bare. The United Nations has recognized it. Scientists are studying it. Countries around the world are watching it. And the rabbits keep digging, keep fertilizing, keep spreading seeds, doing what no human engineering project has ever managed to do as efficiently, as cheaply, or as elegantly. They're turning the desert green. Which leaves us with one final thought. In a world facing problems of staggering complexity, climate change, food insecurity, ecological collapse, we tend to look for solutions that match the scale of the problem. Massive, expensive, technologically overwhelming. But sometimes, the most powerful solutions are the ones that work with nature instead of against it. The ones that find the right creature, place it in the right environment, and trust in the intelligence of living systems to do what no machine ever could. Because sometimes, the answer to one of humanity's greatest environmental crises isn't a mega project worth billions. Sometimes it's a rabbit. If this story made you see the world a little differently today, if it gave you reason to believe that even the most damaged places can be healed, and that the most unexpected solutions are often the most powerful, then share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because the world has a lot of deserts right now. Some of them are made of sand. Some of them are made of despair, poverty, or hopelessness. And if China's rabbits taught us anything, it's this. Even the most lifeless ground can be brought back to life if you're willing to think differently about what it needs to grow. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories about the people and ideas quietly changing our world in ways that rarely make headlines but always make a difference. See you in the next one.